Welcome to Sports Talk Line, where we talk sports 24/7, 365. And today on Battle for the Big East, we're going to be talking with Andrei Greska about Marquette basketball. Welcome to the show, Andrei.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
So one of the things, when you looked at Marquette in the 2020-2021 basketball season, the storyline coming in was, would they be able to, how would they adjust to life without Marcus Howard? Marcus Howard, who, could take over a game, to say the least. He had some big-time scoring, scored over 2,000 points in the Big East. But I kind of noticed a change in style with Marquette, where they used to be more of a finesse. But I feel like now, going forward, they're more of a gritty team. What do you think about Marquette's change in style and how they adopted from the graduation from Marcus Howard?
Yeah, that's a great point, and a valid point, and a necessary point, because obviously when you have Marcus Howard, there's a lot of things you can do offensively that most teams can't. Like he can hit a shot from anywhere, so obviously that makes any given possession lethal when the ball's in his hands. When you take that away, and yeah, they brought in DJ Carton, who's a highly regarded prospect, did very well at Ohio State before transferring out, but it's not the same level of shot maker. So what we've seen throughout the season, from the first game, is that we really played a lot through the post, and that's something that hasn't been done a lot. So you have this triumvirate of Theo John, senior big man, not super flashy, but he bangs down low, he uses his body well. And then you have two very, very good freshmen in Dawson Garcia, three-time Big East Freshman of the Week, just crowned a few minutes ago, and who has soft touch. He's 6'11", plays a little smaller than that in terms of his size. And if you've seen a lot of Marquette games, he gets blocked the highest percentage of anyone on the team, which is weird for a 6'11" guy with good handles and good touch. But I'm picking nits right here. We're talking about someone that's leading the team in both points and rebounds. Mm-hmm. And then you have Justin Lewis, who was a top 75 recruit, but not really someone expected to be a guy. And he's the first one off the bench, and one of the best rebounders I've ever seen. Uses his length, using his athleticism and huge mitts to really grab boards. So now that you have this change from a guard-oriented team, like when you think of Andrew Rousey, Marcus Howard, now you're really a forward and a center-oriented team, and that obviously changes the way you play. So they've slowed down the tempo a ton. They're playing a very methodical, and that also has to do with the fact that the guard play has not been as consistent or as impactful as it has been in past years. So I really do think when you put that all into account, it makes sense what we're seeing, and you could see the idea of exactly how Marquette wants to play going forward.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. You mentioned it. It used to be Theo John was pretty much the only big forward they had, but it seems like that's kind of gone. And there's a lot more rim protection, to say the least. Not just Theo John, really. You also got Dawson Garcia and a lot of those guys. But how do you rate? We kind of talked a little bit about the nucleus of players that they got. They have a unique blend. They have three seniors: Kobe McEwen, Jamal Cain, and Theo John. Kobe McEwen's the senior guard. Jamal Cain and Theo John, they're the senior forwards. Then you got DJ Carton, who transferred in, I believe, from Ohio State. He's kind of more of an off guard. And then you kind of throw in Justin Lewis and Dawson Garcia. So how do you rate? I feel like a lot of times for the success of a program, you can't have everyone all in the same grade. You kind of need like that little balance and all that stuff. You might not win maybe an NCAA title, but it keeps the programs consistent, and you're able to sustain some level of success. But how do you rate how that team is coming together so far? Because when you really look at it, they've had some, they've won at St. John's recently, which has been the thorn in their side for the last few years. And also they got an impressive win against Providence. So how do you rate how that team's doing right now in that combination of players?
Well, I think some of the inconsistencies that we have seen, some of the big blown leads, and I know we want to talk about that a little bit later, but I think that has to do with exactly what you're saying. There's a lot of pieces, and there's no real alpha. There's not someone you can go to when the chips are down. So yeah, there has been good plays, clutch plays from a cadre of players. So Justin Lewis tip in against Wisconsin. Kobe McEwen hit the game-winning bucket against St. John's. DJ Carton hit basically a game-sealing three against Creighton. But at the same time, there's no guy. So when it comes down to the stretch, you know you're going to throw it to him and you're going to win or lose on his back. It really hasn't been that way, which again, I think it's on purpose. With Marcus Howard, we saw a guy that had absurd, I said uber usage, because Ken Pomeroy, there's tiers of like a role player, a mainstay, a heavy usage, and it ends at 28%. He was at 38%, so he was using more possessions than I think anyone we've seen in the Big East since Doug McDermott. So this was on purpose. This was an actual strategy to kind of relieve the pressure from one guy. But when that happens, sometimes it gets a little bit foggy as to who is responsible. So DJ Carton and Kobe have been taking the load, and that's what you expect from guards that have a little bit of experience. But the results haven't always been there. So you have a lot of good pieces, a lot of really, really impactful talent. But then you see the inconsistencies, you see the big leads, you see the big deficits, just because there's not that cohesiveness yet. There's not that delineation of roles. It's basically a who's hot and how can we ride them sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think you kind of mentioned that too, with like, it used to be the last few years, Marcus Howard was the go-to player, because I think a lot of teams, everyone understands that role. Seton Hall had it last year with Miles Powell. St. John's had it a few years ago with Shamari Pons. Butler had it with Kamar Baldwin, and it kind of makes things a lot easier. But this year that's gone. So do you think, or do you think the loss of Howard, or is it something else that has prevented Marquette from maybe closing out some games this season?
I think it's a little bit of that, and also the quality of the guard play, because at the end of the day, the guard is going to be the one who brings the ball up, and if there's pressure, it's going to be on his responsibility to really kind of get through breaks and get into the half-court set that you want. Kobe McEwen has been great, and I hate this, like the first time I'm talking about him, to be negative, because defensively he's a stalwart. He's got the only positive plus-minus of the starters. He's really, really impactful on the defensive end. Always guards the most potent scorer on the other side, and really has done a good job of hitting the shots he has to, not forcing it too much. But even though he's got a clutch Kobe moniker, you just don't trust him with the ball in his hand. So a lot of the times it has to be created for him. And then DJ Carton has been very, very up and down. His shot, he has not found it at the same rate. Last time I checked, he was shooting by like 28% on open, unguarded spot up threes when he was a 45% shooter at Ohio State. So when he doesn't have that shot, he can't use his explosiveness as well as he has in the past. So I don't think there's like a one individual player or thing or the responsibility. It's just there is no sense that, okay, when the chips are down, we're going to get a bucket from this guy, he's going to stabilize us, and we're really going to get the ship righted. It seems like there's kind of a mentality, at least with the fan base, like, oh boy, here we go again. I made a joke against St. John's. I was like, no one was surprised to see the 10-point lead, 11-point lead being blown. Like it was a matter of like when, not if. And I think that the team has a little bit of that too. In some comments I think Dawson made to the Journal Sentinel, the newspaper, he said against Providence, he spoke about, hey, we gave up the big lead, but we were able to regain it. And we didn't get into the same funk that we got in against UConn. So you see it, you know they're thinking about it, the fans are thinking about it. So it becomes a mentality thing and ultimately a talent thing where no one has been able to shoulder, like, okay, we need a bucket, we got to stop the momentum, we're going to do it now.
All right, and speaking about closing out the game, if you haven't done so already, click that like and subscribe button so you can subscribe to Sports Talk Line so you can get all our episodes of Battle for the Big East. And now we're going to kind of switch it to some of the games that Marquette has been able to close out. And I know in the out-of-conference schedule, they had an impressive win against Wisconsin. Wisconsin is has been a top 10 team sometimes in the Big Ten, which is the equivalent of, Mortal Kombat for college basketball this year. Every week you're going up against a top 25 team. And they also had an impressive win on the road at Creighton. Out of those two wins, from the Marquette viewpoint, which one do you think was most impressive?
I'm going to say the Wisconsin one just because it came first. Expectations going to the year kind of vary depending on who, but no one really believed this was more than, like, at best, it was a fringe or bubble-ish NCAA tournament team. The early results didn't really speak to anything different. Losing against Oklahoma State was a pretty frustrating one. So you have that coming in of like lowered expectations, no Marcus Howard, some new pieces, decent enough freshmen. And then you play very well, and they played extremely well defensively against Wisconsin. Wisconsin did miss a couple open shots they probably have made throughout the year, but it wasn't a fluke kind of game where you're like, well, they probably wouldn't win this most of the time. It was a hard-fought, very close game with really clutch plays being made on both sides in the last 2 minutes. So Justin Lewis, DJ Carton gets the line, makes the first, misses the second. Justin Lewis gets a tip in for the win. It was shocking, and it really opened my eyes, because I think until that game I really didn't believe that this was an NCAA tournament team. I didn't think the talent was there. Like I said, a lot of new pieces, and the returning pieces weren't really stellar, to say the least. So that, I think that was very surprising. When they won that, when they stayed close, even before the end, I was like, no matter what happens here, the team played well. Like you can come with your head held high. Obviously winning makes a big difference at that point, because now that shifts expectations. So I would say by far that was the most surprising win. Creighton was weird because they played poorly. Like it wasn't like okay, I don't remember exactly how many. It was about 13 unguarded threes that they gave up against Creighton, which is one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country. Just got like abused in the first half, and we're lucky to be down lower double digits. And then they caught fire. Marquette caught fire in the second half. So that was a surprising, like, I didn't know this team had that in them. Like this was a really impressive offensive showing, even if the defense was poor to abysmal for the entirety of the game. But I don't think that shifted expectations as much as the Wisconsin game did. Wisconsin really, obviously, it's the rival. There's a lot of attention. It was a Friday night featured matchup. So that really altered the perspective going forward. And I think, I mean, I hate to speak on behalf of other fans or other commentaries, but I really think that has kind of hurt the team a little bit, because now we've seen at its best, Marquette has a very high level, and they really haven't lived up to that level very often since that game.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw this out, since you talked about living up to a high level. Let's talk about Coach Steve Wojciechowski. So, okay, Wojciechowski, he lives in college infamy. He was a Duke point guard in the late 90s. And, he was on Coach Mike Krzyzewski's staff. Coach Krzyzewski, he people love him, or people, don't like him. You can say whatever you want to about Duke, but you can say they've been pretty much the most successful program in the last 30 years. But also, when you look at the Coach Krzyzewski coaching tree, haven't had as much success as Coach Krzyzewski. But how do you rate Coach Steve Wojciechowski? Because from an outsider looking in, I really think it was a warning sign a few years ago when I believe Marcus Howard announced he was going to come back to Marquette, and both the Hauser brothers announced they were going to transfer. That was just like, okay, something is going wrong with the program, because you don't have two players who, one transferred to Michigan State, the other one transferred to Virginia, and they're pretty much the number one scorers there. So that was kind of a warning sign, I think, to the state of the program. They really haven't, reached the abyss, but they haven't reached the heights, because they were coming in, if the Hauser brothers were there, it was supposed to be Villanova, Marquette, 1-2 for the Big East the following season. But how do you evaluate Coach Steve Wojciechowski during his tenure at Marquette?
Yeah, a fellow blog, Marquette blog, Cracked Sidewalks, put it best, and I think that pretty much describes the era to a T. High floor, low ceiling. Really, obviously, the first year after Buzz Williams left, there was very little left on the roster. It was one of the worst teams we've seen in Marquette. Only a couple Big East wins, but not much was expected of them. Like I said, the talent level wasn't there. Since then, we saw pretty straight progression the next 3 years. And that's where it kind of has plateaued, where the 2017 team that made the NCAA tournament and got bounced by South Carolina, like that, at that point, if you had asked Marquette fans, they would have been very happy with the trajectory, very happy with the talent level being brought in. And that's the thing. The recruiting has been good to stellar every single year. There's been a couple lulls in individual seasons, but you really can't complain about the level of talent he's brought in. Henry Ellenson, 5-star, one and done. You have Justin Lewis and Dustin Gerster on the team right now, transfers begging to come and playing well. So obviously Marcus Howard, both Hausers, bringing the talent in hasn't been an issue. Like you said, though, keeping the talent, kind of working the chemistry, getting the most out of the teams has not been something I think would be graded on a positive basis. So again, high floor, which is the talent that's coming in, means there's always going to be a relatively competitive team that you put on the court. They're not going to bottom out. They're not going to be a sub 150 team. They're not going to be a DePaul anytime soon. There's just simply too much good 3, 4, 5-star talent coming in year after year. But then that's where the frustration level sets in, I think, as a fan base, and I speak for myself here a little bit, where the team has never been more than the sum of its parts. So you have this talent, you have Hausers, you have Howards, even when they're on the team, it seems like they can't bust through that ceiling, that there's something missing, and I don't know what it is. Like it'd be really easy for me to say, like, if only we did X, Y, or Z, Marquette would be more successful. They could win an NCAA tournament game, they can make it to the final of the Big East tournament, and it's not that simple. Obviously, defensive issues has been a staple the past 5 years. This team was supposed to be built different, without a diminutive point guard in Marcus Howard, who was not the best defender. This was supposed to be the year, like, okay, the offense might not be very good, but the defense is really going to bring things up. And it's not. The offense is top 40, the defense is sub 75. It's same as every year. So you have these talented players, you have this scheme that seems like it should work in theory, and you have now a coach in his 7th year. You can't say he's a new coach anymore, and the results seem to be kind of middling at best. So right now, I would say Marquette is probably like a 2nd to 3rd tier program in the Big East. I mean, from a neutral perspective, you might be able to agree or disagree, but definitely not in the upper echelons.
Yeah.
Only one top 3 Big East finish in 7 years. So it's been a kind of a high floor, low ceiling, and that's where you make the decisions. Like, is that enough? Is that enough for a program that is used to a little bit of higher highs in the previous decade coming into it, but is not really a juggernaut, not a blue blood, isn't going to be contending for national titles every year? And that's where the kind of frustration and differences of opinion set in.
Yeah, I think that, the one change that we talked about before is it feels like it's a more blue collar, tougher team than they have in years past. And I also think, when is Marquette playing their best basketball? They kind of hit that lull towards the end of the season. And I think they also, I think one year they were the 5 seed, great, and they draw Ja Morant from Murray State. There's been a few Big East teams that would be the 5 seed and go out to Washington and play Gonzaga.
Yeah.
Which, those things didn't end up well. So I think, though, too, this is something where they're definitely tougher. Can they make, and they're very like I think you said, high ceiling, low floor. I totally agree with that. If they're hitting everything, if they get Dawson Garcia, who's playing up to his potential, who's 6'10", I believe he plays point forward for you guys. Like, that could, for Marquette, that could be something that can drastically change it. So I do think they got some pieces for him, but we'll see what happens. Could they make? They're a team. I would feel more comfortable if they were a lower seed in the NCAA tournament. Like, they could come out and maybe sneak up on some people. I can kind of see that happening. But what do you think as the prediction for Marquette going forward?
I mean, there was a 6-game stretch starting with Providence that said this is the make or break part of the season, because the beginning part of the Big East obviously didn't go well, but it was the toughest section going in. So now you have 6 games against the middle to bottom, and this is where you have to make hay. Marquette has to go 5-1, 4-2 at worst, and if it wants to keep its NCAA considerations. It's won its first 2. Georgetown is canceled. There's only 3 more tests to come, but I think, if you're asking me personally, like, where I see them finishing, I do think they have enough to make the NCAA tournament, but I don't think Marquette's defense is good enough against upper echelon teams to be anything more than a 9, 10, 11, sort of one of the on the bubble most of the year. And they do have cache, I'm not sure how you want to pronounce it, but in terms of the 2 big wins, like, they have a non-conference win against Wisconsin. It's probably as good as anyone in the Big East other than Villanova's win at Texas. And you have the Creighton away victory, which maybe Villanova might get, but I don't see Creighton losing too many at home. If Zagorowski is healthy, obviously. Yeah. So you have that to bank. There's no bad losses. The worst loss might be Seton Hall at home. That's not a bad loss. That's understandable. Seton Hall, Seton Hall, it was a tournament team. It wasn't a blowout or anything like that. The score got a little bit lopsided with some fouling, but the metrics don't love Marquette, though. I think the net, there were 65 going into this morning. So again, this is a thing that Marquette will have to do. It has to take care of business against teams that are at or below its level currently, and it has to pick out like 1 or 2 games against the upper echelon teams remaining. And can they do that? I think they can. I do think it'll be an NCAA tournament team at the end of the year, but like you said, it's going to have to sneak up on someone if it wants to win a couple of games, because this is not a team that has proven it can play well consistently for more than about 10 minutes at a time.
All right, Andre, thanks for coming on the show. And before we leave, can you tell everyone where we can find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find us at Paint Touches on Twitter, Facebook, and then at painttouches.com.
All right. Thanks for coming on, Andre. And for those of you at home, listen like you play with intensity.